So here's a fun thought experiment for you. Imagine waking up tomorrow and finding out that someone has removed every single screw from your life. And I mean every screw, the ones holding your phone together, the ones in your door hinges, the ones keeping your chair from becoming a pile of wood and sadness on your living room floor. You'd basically be living in a world where everything just falls apart the moment you touch it, like some kind of cosmic prank where the universe decided that structural integrity is overrated and chaos is the new normal. That's basically what happens when you start thinking about the ridiculously simple objects that are literally the only things preventing our entire civilization from collapsing into a steaming pile of dysfunction and despair. And yet we never think about them, because we're too busy worrying about whether our Wi-Fi signal is strong enough, or if that person from high school who peaked in sophomore year is doing better than us on Instagram. The truth is that humanity's greatest achievements aren't held together by innovation or genius or some billionaire's vision for the future. They're held together by stuff so boring and mundane that you probably wouldn't even notice if it disappeared until your entire day turned into a catastrophic nightmare of broken furniture and existential crisis. Let's start with the absolute MVP of keeping literally everything from turning into garbage, and that's the humble screw, which is basically just a metal spike with a twisted groove that somehow convinced the entire world that it's the best way to attach two things together without them immediately giving up on their relationship, like a couple on a reality TV show. Before screws became mainstream, people were out here using nails like absolute barbarians, just hammering pieces of metal into wood and hoping for the best, which is the construction equivalent of closing your eyes and throwing darts at a board while screaming about manifest destiny. The screw changed everything because it actually creates a grip instead of just violently forcing its way through materials like some kind of medieval torture device. And it can be removed and reused, which means you can fix things without destroying them completely, a concept that apparently took humans several thousand years to figure out. Every piece of furniture you own, every electronic device, every vehicle, every building, they're all basically just elaborate screw delivery systems that happen to have other purposes as a side gig. And if screws suddenly vanished from existence, you'd spend the rest of your life watching things slowly vibrate themselves apart until you're sitting in a pile of components, wondering why you ever took stability for granted. Next up is the washer, which is literally just a flat ring of metal that sits under a bolt or screw and distributes pressure so things don't crack or break under stress. And I know what you're thinking, wow, riveting content, a metal donut is saving civilization. But here's the thing. Without washers, every single structure you've ever been inside would eventually crack and crumble because the force of those bolts would just eat through materials like termites with a deadline. Washers are the unsung heroes that prevent bridges from developing stress fractures, that turn your morning commute into a surprise swimming lesson. They keep engines from vibrating themselves into expensive piles of regret. And they make sure that the bolts holding together roller coasters stay tight, instead of deciding that today's the day they pursue their dream of becoming independent and letting you experience unplanned flight. The washer is basically the friend who always shows up to help you move, even though they know you have too much stuff and no plan. They don't get credit, they don't get glory. But without them, everything falls apart. And suddenly, you're the person who has to explain to your insurance company why your deck decided to identify as a pile of lumber in the middle of your barbecue. Let's talk about the O-ring, which is a rubber loop that creates a seal between two parts so that liquids and gases do not escape and ruin everything you love about modern convenience and survival. This innocent little rubber band is single-handedly responsible for keeping your car engine from turning into a fountain of oil in the middle of the highway, your plumbing from transforming your bathroom into an indoor pool that nobody asked for, and space shuttles from exploding because someone decided that cold weather and rubber seals weren't worth worrying about. The Challenger disaster in 1986 literally happened because an O-ring failed in cold temperatures, which means that a piece of rubber smaller than your morning bagel was the difference between a successful space mission and one of the most tragic moments in NASA history. And if that doesn't make you respect the absolute power of simple objects, then I don't know what will convince you. Every time you turn on a faucet, start your car, use a pressure cooker, or fly in an airplane, you're trusting your life to these circular rubber warriors that are holding back chaos and destruction with nothing but their elastic determination and chemical composition. And they do it without complaining or asking for recognition. Unlike literally every human who has ever done anything mildly helpful and then posted about it on social media for 3 weeks straight. Now let's discuss the ball bearing, which is basically just a bunch of tiny metal spheres sitting in a ring that allows things to rotate smoothly without grinding themselves into dust like a coffee bean in an existential crisis. Before ball bearings, rotating machinery was loud, inefficient, and wore out faster than a trending topic on Twitter, which meant that wheels, gears, and anything that needed to spin was basically fighting friction. Like it was in a boxing match, it couldn't win. Ball bearings changed manufacturing, transportation, and basically every industry that involves movement by reducing friction to almost nothing, which means your car wheels can rotate thousands of times without spontaneously deciding to retire. Your hard drive can spin at ridiculous speeds without turning into a very expensive paperweight. And industrial machinery can run for years without needing to be replaced every time someone sneezes near it. Without ball bearings, we'd still be living in a world where everything that moves sounds like a haunted house and breaks down more often than a reality TV star's relationships, and modern manufacturing would be impossible because machines would spend more time being repaired than actually making things, which would turn every product into a luxury item that costs more than your rent and takes 6 months to arrive. Let's move on to the spring, which is just a coiled piece of metal that stores energy when you compress or stretch it, and then releases that energy when you let go, like a tiny mechanical grudge that never forgets and always pays you back. Springs are everywhere in your life doing jobs you never think about. They're in your pens, clicking the tip in and out so you can nervously fidget during meetings. They're in your mattress, keeping you from sleeping directly on a wooden plank like some kind of medieval peasant. They're in your car suspension, absorbing bumps so you don't feel every single pebble on the road like you're riding a very expensive shopping cart. They're in watches, door locks, trampolines, mousetraps, clothespins, and approximately 7,000 other objects that would be completely useless without them. Because springs are basically the storage units of mechanical energy, holding on to potential movement until it's needed, and then releasing it with perfect timing, like a friend who remembers your birthday without needing a Facebook reminder. Without springs, doors wouldn't close automatically, and you'd have to manually shut every single door in your life, like some kind of door-closing servant in a mansion you don't even own. Mechanical watches wouldn't exist, so you'd have to tell time by looking at the sun, like a confused ancient philosopher. And cars would feel like you're riding in a metal box strapped to a wooden cart that's angry at every bump in the road. Next, we have the humble nail, which might seem like the boring cousin of the screw, but let's be honest, nails built most of human civilization before screws showed up acting all fancy with their threads and reusability. A nail is just a pointed metal rod that you hammer into materials to hold them together through sheer force and determination, which is basically the construction equivalent of solving problems by being really aggressive about it until something works. Houses, fences, wooden ships, furniture, and basically every structure made before the 20th century was held together by nails and prayer. which is terrifying when you think about it, because that means entire civilizations were trusting their homes and boats to pieces of metal that were just jammed into wood and hoping nobody sneezed too hard near the foundation. The nail is simple, cheap, and effective, which are three qualities that basically built the modern world before we got all fancy with our engineering and started overthinking everything like we're trying to send a sandwich to Mars. Even today, construction workers use thousands of nails for every project because sometimes you just need something quick and reliable that doesn't require 15 minutes of screwing things in while questioning your life choices. And while nails might not be as sophisticated as their threaded cousins, they're the blue-collar workers of the hardware world who just show up, do the job, and don't ask for fancy titles or LinkedIn endorsements. Let's talk about the valve, which is basically a gate that controls the flow of liquids or gases through pipes and tubes, deciding when things can pass through and when they need to sit down and wait their turn, like kindergartners in a lunch line. Valves are in your heart, keeping blood flowing in the right direction so you don't die from your circulatory system having an identity crisis. They're in your car engine, controlling fuel and air mixture, so your vehicle actually runs instead of just sitting there making expensive noises. They're in your home plumbing, determining whether water comes out of your faucet or decides to take a vacation somewhere inside your walls, where it can cause maximum damage and insurance headaches. Every industrial system, every manufacturing plant, every water treatment facility, they all depend on valves to control flow and pressure, because without them, everything would either be permanently on or permanently off, which would make modern life impossible and turn every home into a chaotic experiment in fluid dynamics that nobody signed up for. The valve is basically the bouncer of the mechanical world, deciding what gets in, what stays out, and what needs to wait until it has proper authorization, and it does this job billions of times a day across the planet without taking breaks or demanding overtime pay, which makes it more reliable than most humans who complain about being tired after answering 3 emails. Now we need to discuss the bearing surface, which isn't as specific as a ball bearing, but is actually any smooth surface that allows one object to slide or rotate against another without friction turning them both into heat and sadness. Bearing surfaces are what make drawers slide smoothly instead of requiring a PhD in applied physics and a crowbar to open. They're what let doors swing without sounding like a horror movie soundtrack. They're what allow heavy machinery to move enormous weights without grinding itself into a very expensive pile of regret and metal shavings. Before humans figured out that smooth surfaces with lubricants could reduce friction, moving heavy objects was basically an Olympic sport that required dozens of people, several farm animals, and a lot of hoping that nobody got crushed when something inevitably went wrong, because engineering was more of a suggestion than a science. The concept of reducing friction through smooth bearing surfaces enabled everything from ancient Egyptian construction to modern manufacturing. And without it, we'd still be struggling to move furniture across the room without calling 6 friends and ordering pizza as payment, which honestly might still be necessary because some couches are just evil regardless of physics. Let's address the gasket, which is basically a piece of material that sits between 2 surfaces to create a seal so that fluids and gases don't leak out and ruin your day by turning your garage into an oil slick or your kitchen into a gas chamber. Gaskets are in your car engine, keeping oil coolant and combustion gases where they belong instead of mixing together like a chemical cocktail that nobody ordered. They're in your plumbing, keeping water inside pipes instead of creating surprise indoor water features that significantly decrease your property value. They're in pressure cookers, making sure steam doesn't escape and turn your kitchen experiment into a culinary crime scene that requires explaining to the fire department. The gasket is made from rubber cork metal or various composite materials, depending on what kind of seal is needed, and it has to withstand pressure, temperature changes, and chemical exposure while maintaining its integrity, which is basically more commitment than most people show in their relationships or New Year's resolutions. Without gaskets, every engine would leak, every pipe would drip, every pressure vessel would be a lawsuit waiting to happen, and modern life would smell like a combination of oil, gas, and regret, while you spent your weekends replacing parts that failed because someone forgot that seals are important. Moving on to the pin, which is just a small cylindrical or tapered piece of metal that holds two or more parts together in alignment, preventing them from moving around independently like toddlers in a grocery store who just discovered they have legs and opinions. Pins are in your door hinges, keeping the door attached to the frame so it doesn't just fall off every time you try to enter a room like some kind of slapstick comedy sketch. They're in machinery, keeping gears and components aligned so everything moves together instead of independently pursuing their own dreams and causing catastrophic failure. They're in grenades as the safety mechanism that stands between you and an explosion, which means that tiny piece of metal is literally the difference between a controlled situation and becoming a cautionary tale that military instructors use to scare new recruits. Pins are so simple that people don't think about them until they fail. And when they do fail, everything falls apart immediately because pins are basically the organizational system of mechanical assemblies, keeping things where they belong and preventing chaos from taking over like a substitute teacher walking into a classroom of seventh graders who smell weakness. Without pins, doors would collapse, machinery would misalign, and every mechanical system would require constant supervision and adjustment like a very needy pet that somehow costs thousands of dollars to maintain and doesn't even appreciate your efforts. Let's discuss the hose clamp, which is basically just a metal band with a screw mechanism that tightens around a hose to keep it attached to a pipe or fitting, preventing it from popping off and spraying fluids everywhere like a garden sprinkler that nobody asked for and everyone regrets. Hose clamps are in your car, keeping coolant hoses attached so your engine doesn't overheat and leave you stranded on the highway, having philosophical conversations with strangers about whether calling a tow truck counts as admitting defeat. They're in your washing machine, keeping water hoses connected so your laundry room doesn't flood and force you to explain to your landlord why there's a small lake where your apartment used to be. They're in industrial systems, keeping high-pressure hoses attached to equipment, because nobody wants to be the person who explains how a loose hose caused thousands of dollars in damage and several workplace injuries that could have been prevented by a $2 clamp. The hose clamp is so simple and cheap that people often ignore it until it fails, and then suddenly they're dealing with leaks, floods, or mechanical failures that cost exponentially more to fix than just using proper clamps in the first place, which is basically a metaphor for how humans approach most problems by ignoring preventive maintenance until everything becomes an emergency that requires panic and expensive solutions. Now we need to talk about the bushing, which is a cylindrical sleeve that reduces friction and wear between moving parts, basically acting as a protective barrier that takes the damage so the important components don't have to, like a friend who jumps in front of criticism meant for you and absorbs it with their confidence and lack of social anxiety. Bushings are in your car suspension, taking the impact and movement, so your control arms don't wear out and turn your steering into a guessing game about which direction the car wants to go this time. They're in door hinges, allowing smooth movement without metal grinding directly on metal, and creating sounds that make you question whether your house is haunted or just poorly maintained. They're in machinery, creating smooth rotation points that reduce wear and extend the life of expensive equipment that would otherwise need replacing more often than your phone screen protector. Without bushings, mechanical systems would wear out catastrophically fast, because metal-on-metal contact creates friction, heat, and wear that destroys components like an aggressive relationship where nobody knows when to back off and give each other space. Bushings are basically the mediators of mechanical systems sitting between surfaces that would otherwise destroy each other and absorbing the punishment so everyone else can keep functioning, and they do this thankless job until they wear out and need replacing, at which point they're tossed aside and forgotten like a trend from 3 years ago that everyone pretended to care about. Let's address the cotter pin, which is basically a metal fastener that looks like a bobby pin, had an identity crisis, and decided to pursue a career in mechanical engineering instead of holding hair in place. Cotter pins slide through holes in bolts or shafts and then spread apart on the other side to prevent nuts from loosening or components from sliding off, which means they're basically the insurance policy of mechanical assemblies that prevents catastrophic failure from happening just because something vibrated loose after 3 months of use. They're in your car, steering and suspension, keeping critical components from disconnecting and turning your vehicle into a metal death trap that decides which direction to go based on nothing but chaos and poor life choices. They're in farm equipment, keeping implements attached to tractors, so farmers don't have to explain how they lost an expensive piece of machinery in the middle of a field because a 2-cent pin decided to retire early. They're in bicycles, keeping wheels attached and brakes functioning, so your ride does not turn into an impromptu lesson about momentum gravity and why preventive maintenance is important. Without cotter pins, mechanical assemblies would gradually lose components, like a person losing their keys, wallet, and dignity over the course of a night out, except instead of just being embarrassing, it would be deadly because critical parts would fall off moving machinery and cause accidents that make people question whether humans should be trusted with tools more complicated than a spoon. So here's the thing that all these simple objects teach us. Civilization isn't held together by grand innovations or brilliant technology or some Silicon Valley entrepreneur's vision for disrupting industries that didn't need disrupting in the first place. It's held together by countless mundane objects that nobody thinks about until they fail and everything falls apart, like a house of cards in a wind tunnel. We walk around every day trusting screws, washers, O-rings, springs, nails, valves, gaskets, pins, clamps, bushings and cotter pins to do their jobs perfectly and silently without recognition or appreciation. And they deliver on that trust billions of times every single day across the entire planet, while we're busy arguing on the internet about topics we researched for approximately 3 minutes. These simple objects are the foundation of everything we take for granted, from the chair you're sitting in to the device you're watching this on, to the building you're inside, to the car you drove here. And they all depend on basic mechanical principles and simple components that have been refined over centuries to be reliable, cheap, and effective at preventing chaos from taking over. Next time you use anything mechanical, take a second to appreciate the army of simple objects working together to make your life possible. Because without them, you'd be sitting on the ground in a pile of broken components, wondering why nobody warned you that structural integrity was important. And maybe you should have paid attention to the boring stuff instead of assuming it would just work forever without maintenance or respect. Now, I want to hear from you, because chances are this video made you notice something you've been taking for granted your whole life without realizing it. What's the most powerful realization you had while watching this? What simple object or system do you suddenly appreciate way more than you did 15 minutes ago? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know what clicked for you. And if you enjoyed this reality check about how civilization is basically held together by hardware, store supplies, and collective faith in engineering, Then write in the comments that you want more videos like this one, where we examine the boring stuff that turns out to be absolutely critical to everything you care about. And maybe hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next time we dive into another topic that sounds boring until you realize your entire existence depends on it functioning correctly without anyone ever thinking about it.